Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going into some really complex, very sensitive source material. It's an extensive interview with an ordained Islamic cleric.
And this isn't just any cleric. He actually advises on counterterrorism efforts globally.
Right. So our mission today is to be, well, laser-focused. We want to provide some critical clarity using his unique perspective.
And that perspective comes from Imam Mohammad Tawhidi. He's a third-generation Orthodox Shia Muslim, a governing member of the Global Imams Council. He's seen this from the inside.
Yeah, he was radicalized and then walked away.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And the core thing we need to unpack today, the one distinction that changes everything, is the difference between Islam, the ancient religion,
And Islamism.
and Islamism, the modern political ideology that basically weaponizes that religion. If you don't get that distinction, you're going to be confused about, well, everything that follows.
Okay, so let's start right there. It's a crucial distinction. What exactly is Islamism? And why is it so important we don't confuse it with the faith of, what, over 1.8 billion people?
Well, Islam, at its core is a spiritual path. It's about morality, your relationship with God. Islamism, that's something else entirely. It's a 20th century ideology.
So it's you.
Relatively, yes.
Yeah.
And its only goal is to use Islamic principles to grab political power. It's basically a political project wearing a religious mask.
So is Islamism a monolith? Are we just talking about the guys engaged in violent jihad?
Not at all.
Yeah.
And that's a key point the Imam makes. It's a spectrum. On one end, you have Islamists who play by democratic rules,
Like running for Congress.
running for Congress, lobbying, working within the system to slowly push their agenda. Then, on the far other end, you've got your violent jihadists, Al-Qaeda, ISIS,
But the shared goal is always political.
always. The politicization of the faith itself.
So if it's a political movement, where did it come from? The source material points to a single origin point for almost all of this.
It does. It traces directly back to the Muslim Brotherhood,
Yeah.
the MB, an organization that's, nearly 100 years old now? It's the ideological and, frankly, the organizational root of global extremism.
And the family tree that grows from that root is, well, it's staggering.
It connects pretty much all the names you hear in the news. The sources are clear on this. Osama bin Laden, he was a member of the MB.
Wow.
And it doesn't stop there. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and even Hamas, specifically its paramilitary wing. They all grew out of the Muslim Brotherhood's ideology and, in many cases, its direct support.
So these aren't just random splintered factions. They're all branches from the same tree.
A single, deeply rooted political tree. And that's why this next part is so important. The Imam talks about how the West, in some ways, helped validate this very adversary.
He specifically points to the Obama presidency, doesn't he?
He does. He says the MB became sort of informal advisors to the White House, but the real symbolic victory, the thing that gave them a huge boost, was something else.
The call to prayer.
The call to prayer. Bringing a member of that specific political community to initiate the adhan at a White House Ramadan dinner. The Imam sees this as a huge strategic error.
Okay, but help me understand. How does one symbolic act in Washington, D.C. have such a massive impact in, say, the Middle East or Europe?
Think about the propaganda value. The Muslim Brotherhood can be struggling, for months without a real win, and then suddenly the most powerful person in the world gives them legitimacy.
That on a global stage.
On a global stage.
Yeah.
It lets the MB go to their recruiters, their fundraisers, and say, look, the great Satan doesn't just recognize us, they honor us. They validate our claim to represent Islam.
It's a symbolic coup.
A massive one. It resonated for years. It's just a fascinating insight into the psychological side of this conflict.
Right. Now let's talk numbers, because this is where it can get terrifying. The Imam estimates there are more than 100 million extremists worldwide.
It's a sobering number, over 100 million. That's potentially, 5 to 10% of all Muslims globally? That's a huge number of people committed to this political ideology.
But 100 million, that sounds overwhelming. How does he see that as a minority movement that can actually be contained?
He points to what happens in the real world. He uses the October 7th incident as an example. Afterwards, the total number of people who took to the streets across the entire American continent to vocally support Hamas
The entire continent.
was around 150,000 people.
That's a huge contrast, an ideological pool of 100 million, but only 150,000 show up to a protest.
Exactly. It makes his point perfectly. The vast, silent majority of Muslims are peaceful. They reject this stuff. But the extremists are just allowed to be the loudest voice in the room.
So they get all the attention and disproportionate influence.
That's the problem in a nutshell.
Okay, so if the Muslim Brotherhood is the decentralized ideological threat who represents the state-sponsored version,
Yeah.
this brings us to Iran.
Right. And the Imam's language here it's intentionally shocking. He calls Supreme Leader Khamenei the Persian Hitler or the Persian Pharaoh.
A king with a turban.
Exactly. He's stripping away the religious costume to show you the dictator underneath.
Let's talk about the system that allows that. Vilayati faqih, the guardianship of the jurist. What does that mean in practice?
It's the core of their revolution. It gives one man, the supreme leader, absolute authority over everything, the state, society, your personal life. And here's the key part. He claims that authority not just over his own Shia followers.
But over all Muslims, Sunni and Shia.
All Muslims, everywhere.
Yeah.
Which is a direct challenge to, say, Saudi Arabia, and the power is absolute. The Imam notes he could terminate your marriage just by saying so. Elections, he says, are a farce.
Because one man holds a veto over everything.
And this ideology has led to what he calls a cult of clerics running the country.
Meaning competence isn't the primary qualification.
Not at all. It's ideological loyalty. Clerics are in charge of hospitals, technology, intelligence, and the result is, in his words, a path of destruction, because the experts aren't in charge.
But thankfully, the source material pivots here. It offers a counter-narrative. If Iran is the destructive model, where's the peaceful one?
He says the real decisions, the ones shaping the future of the Muslim world, they're not being made in Tehran. They're being made in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi.
And Saudi Arabia and the UAE.
Exactly. And those nations are moving decisively toward peace, coexistence, and a total rejection of the Muslim Brotherhood. You can see it in things like the Abraham Accords.
Normalizing relations with Israel.
And initiatives like the Abrahamic Family House in the UAE. It's all rooted in the legacy of leaders like Sheikh Zayed, who believed religion was sacred and personal.
Keep it out of state governance.
Let the experts run the country and let the clerics provide spiritual guidance. That's the model, and it shapes their entire approach to security and immigration.
Which he says the West needs to learn from.
Oh, absolutely. The UAE model is zero tolerance, purely security-focused. They have what he calls an excellent vetting system to keep anyone with jihadi ideology out.
And if someone slips through,
they're deported immediately. If they post something against national security, they're gone. No debate. He thinks the West is letting political correctness get in the way of basic national security.
It's a blunt assessment. And that perspective, it really comes from his own personal journey, right? His own battle with extremism.
It's the key to understanding him. He studied at a university in Qum, Iran, back in 2008, Al-Mustafa University. He thought he was getting a religious education.
But it was controlled by the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard.
Exactly. He wasn't getting theology, he was getting political indoctrination. America's the big Satan, Tel Aviv needs to be bombed. He says it himself. I am a former extremist.
So what was the turning point for him?
It was censorship. The university forbade him from reading certain books, from visiting certain scholars. He realized they weren't guiding him to truth, they were molding him for revolution. He left immediately.
And that experience fueled this mission to reclaim the faith.
Yes. It says it was such ownership. The religion belongs to him, to peaceful Muslims, not to the extremists. He says, Khamenei needs to leave my religion. The Muslim Brotherhood needs to leave my religion. It belongs to me.
The defiance is what he wants to see more of.
And that's his call to action, what he calls the clash of the turbans.
Which isn't a physical fight.
No. It's a war of ideas, a verbal clash. He's saying that imams who reject the Muslim Brotherhood have to be loud. They need to be on TV, online, everywhere. They have to show the world that Islam isn't a monolith.
To drown out the radical narrative.
Exactly. That's how you shrink that 100 million figure, by taking away the legitimacy of their leaders.
This brings us to some tough theological questions. And to understand his answers, he says you have to understand the context of when the Quran was revealed.
Yes, this is so critical. The Prophet Muhammad came to what he calls a primitive society in Arabia, a time of ignorance, or jahiliyyah.
What does that mean, a primitive society?
He's talking about idol worship, burying infant daughters alive, constant tribal warfare. So the Prophet's message had to start with the absolute basics: monotheism, basic ethics.
And to make that point, the Imam highlights a really specific verse in the Quran.
He does. The one that says, enter your homes through their proper doors.
Which sounds obvious.
It sounds absurdly obvious to us. But it shows you the level of common sense he was dealing with. Revelation was sometimes about things as basic as not climbing through your window. And keeping that context in mind is how he debunks a lot of controversies.
Okay, let's get into one. The age of Aisha, the prophet's wife. This is a huge point of contention.
It is, and he completely rejects the interpretation that she was a child. He looks at it historically, sociologically. He calculates all the dates and says she was between 18 and 21 when the marriage was consummated.
And his theological argument.
It rests on the idea that a prophet is infallible. An infallible guide for humanity, he argues, would never do something like that, regardless of what some disputed historical texts might claim later on.
He's reclaiming the prophet's ethical narrative.
Precisely. The other big one is the 72 virgins, the reward in paradise.
Right, something that's been heavily used by extremists for recruitment.
And he says it's purely symbolic. In Arabic tradition, the number 70 didn't mean a literal count. It just meant a lot, an abundance. It was a tangible reward offered to a primitive society that could understand it in those terms.
So it's not a pillar of the faith.
Not even close.
Yeah.
It's a contextual promise, not a core belief. Extremists just choose to read it literally because it's a useful tool.
Okay, one final clarification. Apostasy. Leaving the faith. What's the actual rule on that?
According to his interpretation of foundational Islam, you're free to leave. He is adamant that there is no law agreed upon by all scholars that calls for the death penalty. And that's a requirement for a universal ruling.
So the extremist interpretation is, again, a political choice, not a theological certainty.
It is. His goal isn't to drive people out of the religion. It's to drive the extremist out of his religion.
What an incredible deep dive. We started with this idea that the most important distinction you can make is between Islam, the theology, and Islamism, the political ideology.
And through all the threats, all the controversy he faces, the Imam's conviction is simple. He says, the truth is worth it.
And that's where we'll leave you, with a final thought to consider.
Yeah, Imam Tawhidi argues that those 100 million plus extremists, they're really being led and manipulated by a very small group at the top, a clerical mafia, as he calls it.
So if the peaceful decision makers in the Muslim world think the UAE, Saudi Arabia, if they succeed in their goal of neutralizing that small extremist leadership,
how quickly could that massive following just disperse, fade away?
It's a fascinating question. Is it faster to defeat a political structure than it is to change the theology in 100 million minds?
So keep an eye on that clash of the turbans, that internal fight for the narrative.
Yeah?
That's probably the real indicator of where the religion is heading.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.